Well, I just gotta have one thing to say to you. I got your full basic food groups: bean, bacon, whiskey, and lard.
Oy vey. Yes.
Yes, there we go.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Bearded Bible Brothers. I am Bearded Matt.
I am bearded Josiah.
Yeah, that did sound kind of weird, didn't it? But whatever.
Dear,
We're rolling.
dear
We'll go with it. And today we are addressing another very hot button issue, and we're going to do it with as much grace and dignity as we possibly can. So we're addressing another question that was that somebody wrote into us pertaining to how to relate to, love well, evangelize, the LGBTQ plus community without compromising your beliefs or your morals or how you view scripture, stuff like that. So a very, very hot button issue. And I very much expect we're probably going to accidentally offend some people, but please know that it will only ever be an accident. We are not trying to throw anything in anyone's face. We are not trying to foist anything on anyone, but we're going to have a conversation about it because a lot of the world is having conversation about it, and not
or in
always
some cases,
a healthy way.
Yeah, and if sometimes it's not even a conversation happening had either. In some cases, yeah, but no, I completely
conversation
agree.
implies that it's two directional and has some civility to it, and a lot of the discussions on this topic are far less than civil conversation.
Exactly.
So our objective today is to have a civil conversation about the most God-honoring way to handle this topic.
Yep, and in a loving way. These are friends, these are family members that we're talking about here. And that's one of the reasons why I appreciate our listener writing in about this, because this pertained to someone very close to him. And these are questions that should be able to be asked. And because when you're looking at somebody you love going through a change of any kind, you want to be able to help them, but at the same time, be able to maintain your own values, your own morals, but also your own boundaries as well. What are you the most comfortable with? And so we're going to be talking about that a little bit today. And Matt, you were saying something earlier, even just on a general scale, that I completely agreed with. If you wouldn't mind bringing that back up again, I'd really like it if our listeners could hear you talking about that, because it's something I completely agree with. I've had conversations with my wife about it, but yeah, how do we start this off? What is a general view of this that we can look at?
So we're recording this mid-September 2023.
Yeah.
If you look backward on the timeline, a lot of this started, and feel free to disagree with me on this, but a lot of well, let's just say 5 to 8, maybe 10 years ago, the vast majority of the homosexual community had experienced some sort of trauma, sexual related trauma in their life. Most of the time it was in youth and adolescence or early life.
I'd like to make one point of note here.
Sure.
Mr. Crosswhite is actually a counselor, and you, sir, have a degree, right? You have a master's degree in what exactly?
I have a master's in biblical in professional counseling from Liberty University.
Professional
counseling. What I do as a profession is I'm a biblical counselor. So,
but you have a professional counseling degree, So
Yes.
you can understand the science, the history. You're not just making stuff up off the top of your head. This is some
Correct.
stuff you have studied. You have a degree that certifies you in being able to say he knows his stuff.
Yes.
Okay.
I think I think post-pandemic, we live in a world where there's a lot of experts that don't seem very expert. But so with a grain of salt, but
That's my
yes, I
point.
paid
That's
money
my
and got a
point.
master's
Yes.
degree.
Yes. Yes. That's my point, though. That's my point. So you
Sure.
actually do know what you're talking about. Yes.
Well,
So
some of the
please
time.
continue.
Don't
Please
ask my wife.
continue.
No, I'm just kidding. Okay, so so it used to be that the very, very majority of the population of gay or lesbian people had experienced sexual trauma in their life prior to making that lifestyle choice.
Mm-hmm.
And then more recently, the social contagion of it really took off. And
Mm-hmm.
so the um, the natural questioning of who am I that a young person currently that every single person goes through in their development, roughly between the ages of 3 to 6,
Mm-hmm.
that is being exploited to a degree, to capitalize on the movement of pushing it from individuals who had a sexual traumatic experience,
Mm-hmm.
and it has shifted to, instead of you've gone through a trauma, let's help you process that and overcome it. It shifted to, that wasn't a trauma, that was a normal experience that's totally
Mm-hmm.
fine. You need to learn how to cope with that by any means
Mm-hmm.
necessary,
Mm-hmm.
including dramatic lifestyle changes. And
Mm-hmm.
then the rest of society needs to become aware of it and be okay with it. So,
Yeah.
um, so I'm going to pause for just a second. If anyone hears me trying to talk around the issue or being delicate with my words, I am obviously trying to be delicate with my words, but we're trying to avoid being super political or joining one side or the other.
Mm-hmm.
I'm willing to have the conversation regarding the politic of it, by definition meaning pertaining to public life.
Yeah.
I am not willing to have the conversation about it with regard to left versus right, Democrat versus Republican, because that completely gets out of the realm
Right.
of seeing people for people
Right.
as offering dignity and such. As just a
Yes.
lot like we talked about in our last episode about homelessness.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
Or even bringing in the religious aspects of it, whether it's conservative or liberal. There's
right,
always different ways of approaching something and from different areas of life. But at the same time, we're trying to maintain a more balanced approach to this because this is a very sensitive topic.
yes,
And we want to be sensitive to that reality because it's not just sensitive to the person that's going through this experience of what they're believing about themselves, but it's also an experience that their family members and their friends are going through as well.
exactly, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So that all took place 5, 8-ish years ago, very rough on the timeline. And then it started happening with the same exact pattern with transgendered.
Mm-hmm.
And the vast majority of people for a long time who identified as transgendered were individuals who had sexual trauma in youth or in early adolescence, and um, didn't know how to cope with that, or wasn't able to find help in dealing with it and overcoming the trauma, and
Mm-hmm.
made a lifestyle choice based on that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Whether it felt like a choice or not, they
Right.
coped as best they could or as best they knew
Right.
how.
Right.
Um, in more recent years, the ordinary who am I and what is my identity and how I fit into the world questions that a young kiddo asks has
Mm-hmm.
been kind of run away with, and to
Mm-hmm.
the point where if it's implied, if not outright said, that if any young person is asking those questions, it must mean that they are not who their biology says that they are.
Mm.
And so it's for the sake of, and this is, if this is the perspective that a sexual trauma that happened in the past is not actually traumatic, is a normal experience that just needs to be coped with and lived with.
Mm-hmm.
If that's the mindset and the logic of it, then you have to apply it to all sexual traumas and all coping strategies to deal with those traumas.
Mm-hmm.
So it makes
Mm-hmm.
sense that it would go from the category of homosexuality into transgendered, and now what we're seeing in public forum in our country,
Right.
in
Right.
pedophilia.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
it's the same thing with it's the same thing manifesting in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
But if this is the logic and the philosophy, then you kind of have to apply it across the board.
You know what? This subject brings me up. Now, we already talked about homelessness in our last one, but our homeless episode actually brought up a little bit when it comes to emotional regulation and a lot of psychiatric and emotional issues. And I'm reminded of that movie Split. Did you ever see that? M. Night. M.
I
Night.
don't think so.
I don't want to butcher his name, so I'm sure many people will understand what the movie I'm referring to. But it was about it included James McAvoy. He was a stalker, basically. The character also had DID, or otherwise known as multiple personality disorder.
Yeah,
He kidnaps
dissociative identity disorder or multiple personality. Yep.
Yes, sir, exactly. And he kidnaps 4 girls, if I'm not mistaken, and he ends up. I will ruin the story. He ends up letting one of the girls live, basically because he finds that she's already been mutilating herself, cutting her wrists. And so he says, "You already know. You've already experienced what I'm going through. You understand the pain." And the movie, I don't know if this was M. Night's intent, but the movie gave this idea that being in this way can be something of a superhero effect, because he already did it with Glass. I think that was it. And then also Unbreakable. I think that was the other title. I could be wrong. But one of them had Samuel L. Jackson, and opposite, what's his name? The guy that was on Die Hard. You remember him? Bruce Willis.
Bruce Willis.
Yeah, yep. Bruce Willis. And so Samuel L. Jackson's approach was, I'm going to find my nemesis, because Samuel L. Jackson, his character was highly susceptible to disease. His bones were incredibly brittle. They would break very, very easily. So his idea was, I'm going to try to find someone who's immune to disease and immune to bone breakage. So he commits atrocities such as derailing a train and killing hundreds of people. And the only one to survive without a scratch on him was Bruce Willis. And then Bruce Willis is led to realize, wait a minute, I've never had a sick day. And then in one scene, you've got him in the basement and he's lifting this weight and his kid keeps putting more and more weight on it. And he's still benching. And he's like, I can't believe I'm benching this much. I've never done this before. But it takes these otherwise distasteful or uncomfortable areas, uncomfortable areas of life, and puts them into a light that I think is unhealthy, because it gave reason to Samuel L. Jackson's need to have a nemesis, or find the other person that's opposite him in some very tragic and very, just some very destructive ways. That's what I was looking for. And the same was said for Split. And so I completely agree with you when it comes to this almost idealization of these elements of life that had been shifted into this area, saying, no, we can look at these in a positive light. They're not messed up. They're not wrong. They're not completely broken. There's some strength to be seen here. There is some truth to be seen here. And I'm not saying there isn't. What I am saying, and I think Matt's also, I think what you're also trying to say is that these are areas that we've come led to believe to say that these are natural parts of life and that we should embrace them rather than confront them and or see them as areas that need organizing because it's an element of chaos, right?
Right.
So,
right.
Am I wrong with that? Am I hearing you correctly?
No, I would agree. I would agree with
Okay.
that. But I want to kind of transition the conversation to how do
Please.
we love that population well?
Yeah.
How do we be Christ-like to them?
Because if
So,
there's one thing they're doing, they're saying this is how you're going to love me
yes.
in a lot of ways.
Yeah. So I'm going to give a little bit of the spiel that I give to everybody that I counsel. So
Let's hear it.
every single human being on the planet has a question at our core, and it's a question of worth and value.
Mm.
And it's not part of the fall. God created us with that question inside of us so that we can look to Him and ask the question, am I valuable? Do I have worth?
Mm.
And get our identity from Him and what He thinks of us.
Mm-hmm.
If and when we as human beings look anywhere besides Him for our worth and value, which we're constantly doing. We're always looking for a yes to those questions. Am I valuable? Do I have worth? We're always
Mm-hmm.
looking for a yes from every relationship that we're in. But if our primary yes does not come from God and based on His opinion of us, if
Mm-hmm.
we're primarily looking for it horizontally, then we're going to get ourselves in some bad situations.
Yeah.
Whether that manifests as codependency or workaholism or just any number of things.
Right.
And so individuals that have been through any kind of trauma are
Mm-hmm.
looking to the world around them and their relationships for that yes. And it's harder
Mm-hmm.
to get the yes due to the trauma that they experienced. Now, that gets magnified with sexual trauma. It gets much harder in the vast majority of ordinary relationships, not necessarily just romantic ones, but in
Mm.
all relationships, it gets harder and harder and harder to find a yes that I have value and worth because of the sexual trauma in the past.
Mm.
Because sex is so ingrained, it's so inherent in us as human beings, and it
Mm-hmm.
speaks um, so powerfully to our worth and value, either positively or negatively, depending on the interaction. That's
Mm-hmm.
why scripturally God reserved sexual activity for marriage, so that it
Mm-hmm.
could powerfully speak between a couple, powerfully speak positive identity and positive value to
Mm-hmm.
each member of the couple. That's why
Mm-hmm.
he put those constraints on it.
Mm-hmm.
If we remove those constraints
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and we communicate that the sexual trauma is ordinary and fine, and the coping strategies that you employ to try and just survive with having experienced those traumas, all of those coping strategies are perfectly adequate, and society needs to affirm that your use of those coping strategies is good.
Mm.
That
Mm.
that that gets to where we currently are today.
Yeah. Very
That's how
well
we've
said.
arrived here.
Wow, that's very well said. Wow.
So the so for the individuals who identify as homosexual or trans or whatever, the thing that we need to keep in mind is that
Mm-hmm.
at the root of that problem and at the root of homelessness and at the root of addictions and at the root of vegging out in front of Netflix after a long day, we are always looking for a yes, I have value. Yes,
Mm-hmm.
I have worth in the eyes of
Mm-hmm.
those around me.
Mm-hmm.
That's what every single human heart is looking for. And I don't just mean every single American human heart or every single Western human heart. Every human on the planet. And you can't make generalized statements like that very often. Every human being needs air. Every human being farts. And every human being needs to know that they have value and worth inherent.
Right.
And that's why the Bible goes to great lengths to communicate God's view of us and the value that he places on us. And that's why he's gone to extraordinary ends to demonstrate that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think one of the ways he did that was with the book of Ecclesiastes. How interesting that you find meaning out of meaninglessness. Because in that book, you find that meaning. It's connected to at least 4 different things. One, what you do, having a passion and ability to do something. Food, especially in biblical times, but even now, is still an element of fellowship. People gather around food, break bread with one another. It is a key aspect to all of life. And it's something we either naturally do or sometimes have to force ourselves to do with other people. I say sometimes force ourselves because there's days where I'm just going, I'm not hungry. I don't want to eat breakfast. But then there's also marriage, that partnership. And then at the very end, the writer says, in the conclusion, when all has been heard, fear God and keep his commandments. And that's been reduced to certain things we're not going to get into detail on, but it's reducing God to certain elements of religiosity that's missing the point of what God is trying to establish even in that book. And that is relationship, and relationship with boundaries, right? There's a season for everything. When those boundaries get blurred, I think, what is that season? I think that's chapter 3 that's talking about the seasons. There's a season for living. There's a season for dying. There's a season for building and tearing down. It's in there, whether I've got the right chapter or not. Sure. But these seasons have boundaries. Now, while that can sometimes slowly fade in or out of whether or not it's fading or anything, there's still boundaries that are at work here. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. And so what I'm hearing from you is that when we lose those boundaries in life, it kind of becomes a puddle of just everything and anything. And so it can be that way, right?
Absolutely. And that's why when it comes down to how to love family and friends who do identify as anything in the LGBTQ plus perspective, you start by showing dignity, just like we talked about with the homelessness podcast last episode. It always starts with dignity. If you read through the Gospels, that is where Jesus starts 100% of the time.
Yeah.
Even with the people who he had his most severe rebukes for the religious population who thought they were doing things right and they were misrepresenting God to the masses. There's no 2 ways about that. I'm gonna take a tangent because Christy and I attended a church that we had not been to before this weekend, and they took the unfortunately popular perspective in church world that Jesus leveled his most severe rebukes against the Jews, and that the whole New Testament is about the Gentiles and how awfully the Jews did. That could not be further from the truth. Read the scriptures for yourself outside of an echo chamber, and you'll figure that out. That's not difficult. Anyway, he leveled his most severe rebukes to the religious elites who were not doing a quality job of modeling and demonstrating God to the people, and not doing a quality job of demonstrating relationship with God. But even to those, one other thought, hang on one second.
Please, no.
Even to those people who he had the most severe things to say, he only ever said it with dignity.
Yeah.
He was
Yeah. Yeah.
approaching them
Yeah.
as peers, which inherently means that you are giving dignity. He never
Yeah.
spoke down to any of them. He rebuked their ideas and their philosophies, but
Yes.
he always treated them as human beings.
Yes.
Throughout
Oh, yes.
history, we humans are capable of extreme atrocities against one another, but not before we dehumanize each other. That is a
Mm.
necessary prerequisite to abuse and torture our fellow human beings. You have
Yeah.
to make the other person less than human.
That's wow. That's very well said, because it continues to illustrate the picture I had in my mind as you're saying this. The incident where some of the leaders bring the woman caught in adultery, butt naked, to Jesus, and they treat her as if she's nothing.
Right.
This is going to be our object lesson for the day. And Jesus turns it and goes, no. And he engages with her. He engaged them first. He brought to light what he brought to light what he wanted them to see. But then at the same time, he brought to light what he wanted her to see. He wasn't just dismissing her out of hand. He was actually connecting with her and treating
Right.
her as a member of the family of Israel, and as a member of the family of God. And that's so powerful. So powerful. So let me ask you this. So when we look at this, as I've used the language there, the word family,
Sure.
how do we begin to then understand how we can at least operate, if not approach, an individual who has, maybe even say, a family member who's come to us and says, I think I'm this way. I think this is what I actually am. How would you help them in coming to understand their role and what they should at least expect from themselves
Sure.
in those moments?
I think the best thing to just start with right out the gate is, before you hear those types of messages from friends or family members, please try and immerse yourself in the biblical worldview and the understanding that everyone is always trying to find value and worth. I'm trying not to use the word affirmation or validation, because those have become popular words, and when a word becomes popular, they change their definition. So I'm trying to use
Too
the words
true.
worth and value very intentionally.
Yeah.
Whenever someone comes to you with anything, if they tell you, "Hey, I'm getting a divorce,"
Right.
or "I just got laid off," or "I
Mm-hmm.
think I'm homosexual," or
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is, please live your life understanding that everyone is looking for worth and value. Relate
Mm-hmm.
to them on that level. They might
Mm-hmm.
not be looking for worth and value in the healthiest possible way. That's okay. Neither do you. Neither do
Mm-hmm.
I. We
Mm-hmm.
we don't do this life perfectly.
Mm-hmm.
But please, just from the get-go, start with the assumption that everyone is looking for worth and value.
Right.
So, and then when you do hear a family member or a friend say, I think I'm trans, or I think I'm homosexual, or anything else in that LGBTQ, when you hear
Mm-hmm.
them say that, understand that you're going to have to experience some grief. You are
Yeah.
going to go through a grieving process. But
Yeah.
also know that the other individual has probably been experiencing grief for quite a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And they're trying to figure out how to cope
Mm-hmm.
with some trauma, or how to answer some, because that's not exclusively the case anymore now, thanks to social contagion. They're trying to figure out who they are and how they fit into the world. And
Right.
they're wondering if that might be part of the solution.
Right.
But you need to know that you're going to experience some grief, because you're
Yeah.
going to grieve the loss of who you thought this person was,
Mm-hmm.
or at the very least, grieve the relationship that you had prior to hearing those words.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean you need to change your perspective on the best way for a human being to experience worth and value. That
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean that you
Mm-hmm.
need to necessarily corroborate everything that anyone ever says.
Mm-hmm.
What it does mean is that as a disciple of Yeshua, as a student
Mm-hmm.
of the scriptures, you do need to respond by continuing to communicate dignity and value.
Right.
You don't have
Right.
to agree with someone in order to do that.
Right. And I think that I remember I was talking to a therapist one time, and she said that there's 4 basic pillars of psychology she sees Jesus using. And that very first one is that the person is seen and heard, right? Seen and heard. And that's what you're going to here. That's what you're talking about. Because when somebody talks out of an area of trauma, talks out of an area of grief, they want to at least be able to know that I'm being heard. You're not trying to fix me. It's those moments, even in my own marriage, where my wife says, okay, I'm not wanting you to solve this. I'm not looking for the answer. Just hear me. Okay. Happy to do that. Right. Because especially when it comes to guys, we do have that drive to want to fix things, to solve things, to provide that answer. And it's hard to even admit at times, I don't know what the answer is. But at the same time, when it comes to, so our listener wrote in very specifically that they have a family member who has made a change in lifestyle. And they're wondering, how do I, as a matter of fact, I actually like the question that they asked. They asked they're talking about their own values and the values of the other individual. Where do you draw those lines is the first question. But the second one is, how deep are the demands of hospitality, and how tightly do we ask our guests to adhere to Christian values so we can honor God with our home? That's a very good question. And I think it goes back to what we mentioned a little bit earlier, is boundaries. Townsend and Cloud wrote a book called Boundaries. And not only from the Christian market, but even in the secular market, this book is highly recommended. I've seen it on syllabi or syllabus, whatever, plural or not, the syllabuses of classes in both Christian and secular and educational settings. This is a very good book. And as I brought up earlier about Ecclesiastes seasons, boundaries are important, right? Especially when we've made it important when we have a neighbor saying, no, I can have that tree there, and the other neighbor saying, no, you cannot. The court is going to look at boundaries, right? They're going to look at, well, okay, he can have the tree there, but this part of it has to, you do have a say about this part of the tree, right? But this is people we're dealing with. We're not talking about trees here. We're dealing with people. And it's even more difficult when it's someone that you've grown up with. I'm not, so I want to say something, and I'm not saying that this is exactly how he's feeling. This is how my brother actually had to experience me go through what we talked about last week. He had to watch his oldest brother change, who tried to kill himself, to the point where he's having to reestablish a new boundary. I thought I could trust him. I thought he was this person. I thought he was behaving this way. And then all of a sudden he tries to go off himself. Really? I'm sorry. That was a little rough. That was a little.
Those are the thoughts that
straightforward.
That one has. Yeah.
That is the thoughts he had. And he had to establish a new boundary. And in that establishing that boundary, it reestablished our relationship with each other. I'm not going to get into details of what he said. Thankfully, he and I have an amazing relationship now, and we continue to love and listen and just engage each other in life. That I will say.
And why? Because relationships change over time. If you go through if you set healthy boundaries and you maintain the relationship at whatever level is healthiest and both parties are willing to participate in, then that doesn't necessarily have to be the status of the relationship until the end of time, because the relationship will flex and change as both parties grow and mature, and as both individuals change, the relationship will inherently change too.
Exactly. Especially when you're also, so when you've got the element of your own family, and you're trying to maintain that family in the values and in the morals that you have established and how that family is going to operate. Every family's got different ones, and that's fine. Some of them can look very similar and some of them can look very different. But at the same time, what he's talking about is hospitality. And when he brings up that word, it takes me back to various cultural practices between people. There are different parts of the world where hospitality is so highly valued that if you don't offer hospitality, you are looked down upon in that societal structure. And then there's others where the society could care less about hospitality, right? But yet he has made hospitality very important to him. So how can he extend hospitality to this family member when he's concerned about what not what who the family member is? We're not going to the person here. We're going to a practice, a lifestyle, well, how that might influence, say, their young child or the boundaries of their home. Let's just go to even the boundaries of their home. One thought that comes to my mind is not only are you going to have the conversation, which can be in and itself very hard because you're not sure how the other person is going to respond, right? Me and my brother, we had to have that conversation. It was very hard. We had to give each other the benefit of the doubt too, because that's a very intrinsic part of relationship, right? And when trust is damaged or destroyed, it's hard to give someone the benefit of the doubt. But when you can make that small effort and put yourself out there, sometimes when you put yourself out there, people are able to respond empathetically in the sense that they can sense you're trying to understand them. You're putting yourself in a position to be vulnerable, right? And so one way I would see that for me personally is, okay, I really want to see you. I want to spend time with you. There are certain boundaries and certain expectations and values that I've put in my household. And so what would make me feel the most comfortable is if I pay or help you pay for a hotel room nearby or find you a bed and breakfast or something. It's not pushing them away. It's maintaining certain boundaries that you have valued. What do you think of that, Matt? You think that would be a healthy response?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. But at the same time, I think we can't have this conversation without also talking about cancel culture.
Oh boy.
Because as soon as you set a healthy boundary with anyone really, but especially as soon as you set a healthy boundary with someone who has sexual trauma in their past and who is looking horizontally for worth and value, any amount of perceived obstacle from your side, it might be a healthy boundary. From their side, it might be a perceived obstacle to relationship.
Very true.
And so there very likely can be a negative reaction, and they might take it as, you don't love me, you don't care about me, you see me as having less or no value.
Right.
And then cancellation happens because it's communicated in our society today that if anybody doesn't give you a yes to your worth and value question, unequivocally and agreeing with all of your lifestyle choices and all of your everything that is you, then you have to cut them out of your life.
Yeah.
That goes with it. So be Christ-like by setting healthy boundaries and leaving and risking being canceled.
Yeah.
But leaving that up to the other individual. Be willing to stay in relationship with them as long as they are willing to be in relationship.
Yeah.
Think about this. Yeshua rubbed shoulders with the Pharisees for 3 years of ministry, and he upset them greatly on a number of occasions.
Yep.
But they were willing, generally, to have a continued relationship with him. He goes down to Jerusalem in that 3rd year of ministry and speaks against the Sadducean cult that was running things down there, and he gets killed in a week.
Mm-hmm.
Some people are willing to stay in relationship with you, and some people aren't.
Right.
Be willing to
Right.
set the healthy boundary anyway. Be
Yeah.
willing to risk being canceled anyway, but
Yeah.
also be willing to stay in relationship with them
Mm-hmm.
until, if they should choose to cancel you,
Mm-hmm.
choose to be okay with that.
Yeah.
If they should choose to stay in relationship with you and have a much more surface level relationship, or try to have the same level of relationship, but we just don't talk about some particular subjects, whether religion or politics or LGBTQ or whatever it is. Maybe you just don't talk soccer with some family members. Whatever the subject is, you just
Yeah.
be willing to stay in the relationship as long as they
Mm-hmm.
are willing to,
Mm-hmm.
but maintain your
Mm-hmm.
healthy boundaries.
Right.
You don't
It's
cancel
yep.
others.
Yep. And that's not justice. That's not
Right.
justice.
Exactly.
It's an idea that we've got. Oh, this is justice. No, it's not. I like something I was once told is that forgiveness is looking at God and recognizing He's the one sitting on the throne instead of telling Him, "Hey, can you move over? I need to take a seat."
Right.
It's looking at God and saying, "I give them to you. You judge them or let them go because it's your law that they broke and they hurt me in the process." Right? That's a very real element of that. Another one. So I've always heard the term neutral ground, right? So when you have these two, let's go back to medieval. You have these two armies coming together and they're willing to fight. They do truce, right? Let's go truce. Then they come to a neutral ground and they have a chat, right? Well, one of the elements that I would call biblical in this is that it's creating spaces. What God did, especially in Genesis chapter 1, when we first see it, He's creating a space and He's filling it. Right? He's established a boundary on all the borders of this space, and He's filling it with something specific, whether it's with light, whether it's with plants or animals and so forth. And so when you're looking at your house, you're looking at a space that you and your family live in. And while it's important to maintain that, it's also important to be able to establish, when you're establishing something new, whether you've got a boundary in place that's a little flexible, whether it's your comfort level or your ability to handle or your confidence, there could be a lot of words put in there. When you're in a position of going, I don't know what to do, work with that person in creating a space. This is going to be our space that we work with. And we will come to this space and we will see what develops here, what grows, what we end up putting in this space. And then as that relationship develops and the trust develops with that relationship, then those boundaries can be adjusted. It's not something that has to happen here and now. We live in a microwave effect. I get that. We have an instantaneous society. We've got knowledge at the grab of a hand, almost literally. I would almost imagine, I can't wait to see somebody who has the hand device that's actually implanted in them. I've actually seen that telephone. It's okay, weird. But anyways, it's necessary to give ourselves time and patience. If the other person doesn't reciprocate, allow them that ability to respond that way. They're not there yet. Right. Is it against you? Not necessarily, because if they're doing it to you, they're probably doing it to other people too. You're not the only one, right? That's something to also keep in mind. But the ability to create something with someone, whether it's a relationship or something else, the ability to create with someone can be more important. And when you go into it with that mindset, it kind of de-emotionalizes it, although not to say that emotions won't be a factor. Emotions can still be very much a part of it, but it can set terms, going back to that truce idea. It can set certain terms. What are we willing to do right now? Then you come back after a time and you reassess things. I'm not using the word renegotiate intentionally. You reassess, right? Because relationships are not as political. They're not as capitalistic. They're not as everything, there's a lot of different fields in life, but they're not so black and white as a lot of people think. They are lives, and there's things that come in and out. They are flexible, they're malleable, they're adjustable. That's why fake languages don't work the way they do. Sorry, my linguistics coming out a little bit. My linguistics background is coming out a little bit, which is why relationships should and must be organic. If they're not, then something else is being made there, and it can continue to influence what you're trying to do. You want to have that intentional relationship, then have it, but be honest with yourself and be honest with them. If you're not, that sets it up for it can set it up for some really nasty turns, and that can come down the road. So what do you think, Matt?
I think that's our episode.
Okay.
Thanks for sticking with us as we navigated these waters. Please, we'd love to hear your thoughts, comments, questions, concerns, hopes, goals, dreams, aspirations, expectations, critiques, whatever you've got for us. We are beardedbiblebrothers@gmail.com. In your emails, please try and be as dignified as possible. Again, we did not mean to offend anyone.
No, not at all.
I'm sure we did on some level. In today's society, it's almost impossible not to offend someone.
Yeah.
But please know that we walked this just as delicately as we could, while still actually having a conversation rather than just staring at each other for an hour. So, but we would love your feedback, positive or negative. So please write to us, beardedbiblebrothers@gmail.com. Also, please let us know what kind of content you want to continue to hear. Do you want to do more Bible studies through books of the Bible? Do you want to do more topical studies? Do you want to do conversations like this? Do you appreciate the flexibility of it all? Let us know what you guys want to hear, and we will
whether it's
see what we can do.
And find out what kind of wax Matt uses on his head. We could have a conversation about head wax.
I don't buff my head. Despite the fact that it might look so, I do not use Mother's brand polishing compound. That's for cars, not for noggins.
Right.
Sheesh. All right. I'm going to cut you off before you get to say anything else. Thank you guys for tuning in with us. Thanks for being here. We look forward to our next conversation. Until then, God bless.